The former capital of the ancient world and the current capital of Italy is a colorful, controversial, and chaotic place. Reminiscing and loud, dignified and bohemian, religious and profane. It's the citadel of art as we all know it. But can we ever really know it? As the classic saying goes, if you spend one day here, you'll see some of Rome. If you spend 2 weeks here, you'll learn much about it. But if you live here, you'll never get to know it. According to the travelers of ancient times, there exist two kinds of people in the world: those who have seen Rome and those who have not. Heaven itself could not be more beautiful than this, enthused the poet Claudius. Rome was the largest human creation of the ancient world, called simply as the Urbs, the city, and its sights attracted travelers already in those times. Tourism is actually the invention of the Roman Empire, as Tony Perrottet points out in his brilliant book, Pagan Holiday. The rush of tourists has not abated ever since. Quite to the contrary. Hundreds of thousands of people from all over the world arrive to learn about the heritage of the past, about the Eternal City and the Vatican. Many start getting acquainted with it here, at the St. Peter's Square. It's a strange relationship. The St. Peter's Square with the Basilica is an integral part of Rome, of the architectural, cultural, and artistic heritage of Italy, and the panorama of the capital. At the same time, it's the seat of an autonomous state whose sovereignty is unequivocally accepted by almost all countries. The one thing that differentiates it from the other mini-states of Europe is that the Vatican's head of state is not only the leader of the tiny portion of land, but also the head of a global religion of millions. As a result of this worldwide power, the respectability of the papal state remains, even if you know that you can walk around this 0.4 square kilometer country along its star-shaped castle walls in an hour at a leisurely pace. The St. Peter's Square is proof of the genius of its creator, 17th century architect and sculptor Giovanni Lorenzo Bernini. The St. Peter's Basilica was already standing when, upon the request of the Pope of the time, an appropriate forecourt was to be designed for it. Bernini felt that the main temple of the church should reach out towards its followers like motherly arms to embrace them. He wanted to implement this principle in practice. Thus, the square, surrounded by the elliptical colonnade spanning 340 meters at the widest section, was created. In the middle, the 26-meter-tall Egyptian obelisk was erected that had been brought to Rome from Alexandria by Emperor Caligula. Bernini also vested it with a practical function. The shade it casts on the stones of the square marks the passage of time. The 20-meter-high, semicircular colonnade consists of 284 Doric columns and 88 pillars. When Rome burnt down in 64 AD, Emperor Nero accused the followers of the upcoming new religion, Christianity, of setting the city on fire, although it was generally thought that he himself did it. In any case, the fire was reason enough for him to order a mass execution of Christians. That was when Apostle Peter, one of the first disciples of Jesus and propagator of the new religion, was killed. In 1940, Pope Pius XII ordered excavations under the nave of the basilica. In the grottos under the Vatican, they found the skeleton of a large old man wrapped in gold-embroidered purple cloth. Although there's no irrefutable evidence to support it, based on the fragmented inscription written in Greek, archaeologists believe these are the earthly remains of the apostle himself. Emperor Constantine, who converted to Christianity, was the first to raise a temple above the grave. That was the predecessor of the St. Peter's Basilica today. The 30-meter-high, 5-nave building was decorated by paintings and mosaics. During the Avignon papacy, the abandoned temple started to decay. In 1450, the Pope commissioned architect D'Angelo Bramante to build the new church. After his death, Bramante was first succeeded by Giuliano da San Gallo, then by two of the greatest artists of the Middle Ages, Raphael and Michelangelo. The latter was already old at the time, but he worked tirelessly, sparing neither himself nor the others. He designed the famous dome and contributed with many sculptures and paintings to the fame of the St. Peter's Basilica. After Michelangelo died, Carlo Maderno completed the building to its final form, and then later Bernini joined the work. He first prepared the bronze canopy, and subsequently created the square as we see it today. The largest temple of the Catholic world was eventually consecrated in the fall of 1626 by Pope Urbano VIII. The most famous sculpture of the basilica is Michelangelo's La Pieta, which the artist made when he was only 25. The novel and the movie, entitled The Agony and the Ecstasy, tell the story of Michelangelo and his patron, Pope Julius II. The two great figures of history are portrayed by two of the greatest actors, Charlton Heston and Rex Harrison. The basilica houses 229 marble columns, 44 altars, and 360 statues. It's 212 meters long. The height of the 42-meter wide cupola is 133 meters. There's a little story about the colossal size of the basilica. Once upon a time, 10,000 soldiers went to Mass there. Their commander came late and thought the troops had not arrived yet, although they were already inside, in one of the side naves. On the plinth encircling the square there are 96 statues of Catholic saints and martyrs. Upon the news of the barbarian attacks, Emperor Aurelian raised a new wall around the enlarged city in 270. There were gates guarded by bastions along the 19-kilometer-long and 7-meter-high walls. Most of the city walls are still there and allow us a view into how the city grew over time. On the other hand, the passageway connecting the Vatican with the Sant'Angelo Castle was built only in the early 1400s. It's not part of the ancient city walls, although it complements them well. In September of 1505, 150 volunteers walked all the way from Luzerne to Rome to offer their protection to the Pope. The Swiss Guard still exists. They still wear the same blue and yellow uniform and helmet designed by Michelangelo when standing guard at the gates to the Vatican as their predecessors did. The entrance to the Vatican Museum is on the 10-meter-high city walls of the Città dei Vaticani. Hundreds of thousands of art lovers are willing to undergo all kinds of inconvenience to stand in line for a whole day if necessary, just to see the invaluable artifacts on display at the museum. The museum even has its own designated subway stop, but can be reached by bus as well. The Vatican Museums are home to the richest and largest art collections of the world. In addition to numerous incunabula and 60,000 hand-copied codices, its library has about 1 million books. It has a plethora of Egyptian, ancient Greek, and Etruscan artifacts. The most famous attraction is the Sistine Chapel with the frescoes of Michelangelo, but no visitor should miss the stanzas of Raphael either. The 17 rooms of the gallery host the best of the world's painting in chronological order. There are street vendors selling sandwiches, beverages, and coffee to the people waiting in line, often from dawn into the night. You can even buy photo albums, postcards, and art calendars, and various souvenirs here. Today it's not widely known that the large round building of the Sant'Angelo Castle, the Castel Sant'Angelo, often believed to be a medieval castle, was originally the mausoleum of Emperor Hadrian. It was modeled on the Halicarnassus mausoleum, and today you can still read the epitaph written by the emperor himself engraved in marble on it. Little soul, roamer and charmer, body's guest and companion, who soon will depart to places darkish, chilly and misty, and end to all your jokes. The 64-meter diameter cylinder was lined by marble columns, but Belisar's army broke them off and threw them on the attacking Goths. The grave site was involved in many battles also in subsequent years, so it was gradually transformed into a fortress. It's the place where Pope John X was strangled, where Giordano Bruno and the Count of Cagliostro, the adventurer, were imprisoned, and Benvenuto Cellini fired his cannons at the besieging army. The popes returning from their Avignon captivity made the Castel Sant'Angelo their shelter, which they had connected to the Vatican via a passageway. The first pope forced to use the Passetto was Eugene IV during the Florence Counter-Synod. The building was also used as a summer residence before the Castel Gandolfo Castle was built. The walls of the luxurious papal suite were adorned by frescoes painted by the apprentices of Raphael. In Hadrian's time, there was only a hill full of cedars on the top of the edifice. It was replaced by the statue of an angel sculpted by Giuliano della Porta that stands in the yard of the castle now. In its spot, a statue made by a Flemish sculptor named Verschaffelt was placed. The first bridge leading to the Sant'Angelo Castle across the Tiber had been built by Hadrian in 134. It still features 3 of its original arches in the middle, integrated in the finely shaped Baroque bridge. framed by sculptures of Bernini and his apprentices. The statues were made for Pope Clementine IX. The figures hold the tools of Christ's trials in their hands. It seems as if the shroud of the angel holding the thorn crown were ruffled by the ever-present mild breeze blowing over the river. The statue of St. Peter was made by Lorenzetto, while the statue of St. Paul was sculptured by Taccone 150 years before on the commission of Clementine VII. The style of the bridge is reminiscent of the Charles Bridge in Prague, since they both feature a row of Baroque statues lining a pedestrian bridge from earlier times. The huge palace standing next to the Castel Sant'Angelo on the riverbank represents an entirely different era. The Palazzo de Giustizia, or the Palace of Justice, was completed by 1910 in an eclectic Art Nouveau style. The building is ornamented by statues of Roman jurists, and from time to time its garden is used as a venue for events and receptions organized by the city. The houses on the other side of the river show a variety of architectural styles as well. Northeast of the Castel Sant'Angelo, just above the river bend, between the Via Flaminia and the Via del Corso, lies the Piazza del Popolo. Travelers arriving to Rome from the north, by foot, on horse, or by carriage alike, came into town at the Piazza del Popolo. In the 16th century, the square was transformed to an elegant parlor in order to make an immediate, pleasant impression on everyone who comes to the city. That was when the Corso was created as well. It soon became an increasingly popular pastime to come here and watch the members of the royal family, the foreign gentlefolk, and the sumptuous coaches of the aristocrats pass by. More and more elegant shops appeared and started lining the way. The square was designed by Giuseppe Valadier, who designed terraces, embellished parapets, sculptures, and fountains quite lavishly. In the middle of the square stands the obelisk that was brought to the Circus Maximus from Egypt by Emperor Augustus. There are light and sound shows here in the evenings in the summer. The statues are from the school of Valadier, while the city gates, the Porta del Popolo, were built by Vignola, based on the designs of Michelangelo. In 1655, Bernini gave it a more ornamented look for the occasion of a visit by Christina, Queen of Sweden. The daughter of the Protestant King Gustav Adolf converted to Catholicism, renounced her throne, and moved to Rome. Later, a movie was made about her life, starring Greta Garbo. Next to the imposing gates, to the left, stands the church of Santa Maria del Popolo. There are several legends connected to this humble-looking building. Allegedly, this is where the walnut tree stood, under which Nero, the bloody poet and infamous persecutor of Christians, had been buried. The soul of the emperor who killed himself could not rest in peace, and his ghost haunted the people in the neighborhood at night. So Pope Pascal II had the tree cut and raised a chapel in its place. On the foundations of this building was later constructed the temple that became the monastery of the Order of St. Augustine. That was where monk Martinus started out, soon to become known all over the world as Martin Luther. The construction of the temple was led by the Della Rovere family that gave several popes to the world. Their crest, with the oak leaf insignia, can be seen in many places. An illustrious member of this family was Pope Julius II, who became famous through the Sistine Chapel. He was the one who ordered the development of the Santa Maria del Popolo church, which was originally designed and built by Pontelli and Bregno in a Renaissance style. Later, Bramante, then Bernini, redesigned it to better fit the requirements of the Baroque. However, an expert's eye can still spot the wonderful creations of the Renaissance. The first chapel on the right is the tomb of the Della Rovere family. A fresco depicting the life of St. Jerome was painted on the walls by Pinturicchio. He was also the creator of the altarpiece titled The Adoration of the Child Jesus. The master and his apprentices worked on the paintings here for years. They practically lived in the temple. Bregno, Caravaggio, and Raphael also worked here. So that is why the church is so highly regarded by art historians, despite its rather insignificant exterior. There are few churches that could provide such a perfect introduction to Roman art and architecture. The masters of the early Renaissance, Pinturicchio and Bramante, then Raphael of the High Renaissance, and the Baroque masters Caravaggio and Bernini all produced brilliant creations not only in painting, but in sculpture and architecture as well. It's also rare that the chapels of the church are intact, and the paintings on the walls tell a complete story. In the Chirazzi Chapel, Caravaggio and Carracci created the portraits of Peter, Paul, and Mary with the help of a fresco painter. Their relationship to heaven is depicted on the ceiling. Through Bernini's expert hands, the artistic impact of Raphael's Gigi Chapel is even more pronounced in this small space. So wrote Reed Bramblett and Geoffrey Kennedy in their book about Rome. Their description further supports the view that the frescoes in the churches served as textless comic books for the uneducated and often illiterate churchgoers, thus explaining the stories of the Bible to them. The tombs are interesting not only from an artistic point of view, but also because they speak of the stormy history of Italy. This is the gravesite of Vanozza Catanei, the lover of Pope Alexander VI and her son, Don Juan Borgia, who was possibly killed at the order of his brother, Cesare Borgia. And Ascanio Sforza was the brother of the famous monarch Ludovico il Moro. The last chapel on the left features the famous pair of shocking and overwhelming, but at the same time spellbinding frescoes of Caravaggio, the Conversion of St. Paul and the Crucifixion of St. Peter. After the passionate and visionary images, the calm and balanced Renaissance paintings of Raphael and the gravesite of his friend and patron Andrea Chigi and his family offer a soothing effect. Even to myself, I hardly dared to tell where I was going. All along the way I was scared, and only when I reached the Porta del Popolo was I sure that I had arrived in Rome. The entire history of the world is connected to Rome, and I consider it my second birthday, a real rebirth, the day when I arrived in Rome, as Goethe wrote in a book entitled A Journey in Italy, that was created here, on the Via del Corso, 1 block away from the piazza, in the house that has a plaque on its wall commemorating the great poet. The Santa Maria dei Miracoli and the domed church of the Santa Maria in Monte Santo provide a worthy finish to the square. Although Bernini and Fontana also contributed to the designs of these two buildings, their value doesn't compare to that of the Santa Maria del Popolo. The two churches look almost exactly the same, and only upon closer examination will you start noticing the differences. In the crowded downtown of Rome, even the tiny Fiats get stuck many times. The most effective means of transportation are the scooters here, the famous Piaggios and Vespas. The Piazza di Spagna is a short walk from the Piazza del Popolo along the Via del Babuino. When you read about the cultural history of Rome, you can be overwhelmed by the plethora of famous names you encounter: Casanova, Goethe, Stendhal, Gogol, Liszt, Berlioz, Wagner, Baudelaire, Keats, Fellini, and many, many more. The Piazza di Spagna was named after the nearby Spanish consulate. The pink stucco building of Casina Rossa was once home to the famous Swedish doctor and writer Axel Munthe, who made the island of Capri famous. John Keats also lived and died in this house in 1821. The Babington Tea House is pretty much considered an institution in Rome, just as the Café Greco. The former was established because many English people lived in the area, but they couldn't find any tea up to their standards in the entire city. And the latter was opened by a shrewd Greek merchant and coffee importer. All the famous people who visited Rome paid almost a mandatory visit to both places as well, so listing their names would be similar to reciting a phone book. We must make a note of Gian Lorenzo Bernini and his father, Pietro Bernini. The latter created the barge fountain, standing at the foot of the steps. One day the river Tiber flooded the city, and the water carried an ark to the square. The fountain is a memento of that event. To circumvent the low water pressure, the water doesn't shoot up high, but flows into the pool from the cannons of the ship. Across the pool, in the middle of the hourglass-shaped square, are the stairs leading all the way up to the Trinito dei Monti church. The steps were designed by Francesco de Sanctis for King Louis XV. The obelisk was originally the main ornament of the garden of the historian Sallustius Crispus. Just like most European metropolises, Rome also has its hop-on, hop-off sightseeing buses, and the two lines, the red and the blue, have stops at all the notable attractions. You can get off at any stop, see the monuments and sights, then get back on and travel to the next site. The ticket is valid for an unlimited number of trips within 24 hours. You can select the language of the tour guide and take excellent pictures from on board. Bernini's Triton fountain stands in the middle of the Piazza Barberini, in front of the hotel named after it. The shell emerging from the pool is held by 4 fish, and all the animals of the Bernini family coat of arms were represented too. Actually, it was Fellini who made the Via Vittorio Veneto famous with his movies Rome and Dolce Vita, but that was also the location of Franco Nero's investigations in the crime movie titled Ring of Death in 1969. This avenue was the glamorous and coveted spot of high life, and although its glamour has somewhat faded, many people still come here hoping to catch a glimpse of an Italian movie star. We're heading east towards the Piazza della Repubblica. The name of Termini Station is a memorial to the baths of Diocletian right next to it. The modern building is not only a railway station, but there is a huge bus terminal in front of it, and it's an end station of the subway lines. Where the former Exedra, a semicircular lobby of the bath stood, now is the Piazza della Esedra. The square is encircled by 2 rental buildings that are home to apartments, a hotel, shops, a movie theater, and corporate offices. In the middle of the square is the Fountain of the Naiads, one of the most beautiful among the many you'll find in Rome. The sea beast teasing nymphs give an especially spectacular sight lit at night. Emperor Diocletian presented the largest ever bathing establishment to the people of Rome. Its surface area is about 113,000 square meters, and its ruins were the subject of many ideas for reuse. The most useful would have been to restore the baths, but that would have necessitated the rebuilding of the aqueduct that was also destroyed by the Goths. So, the decaying structure was taken over by Carthusian friars instead. One of the priests had a vision of the Holy Mother and the 7 archangels, so the monks decided to build a church. The design of Michelangelo, who was 88 at the time, that included the old walls and the arches impressed the Pope so much that he gave permission for the construction. Unfortunately, it's hard to imagine the genius of the original plan now, because Vanvitelli extensively redesigned it in the 18th century. Unto this day, this is the 2nd largest church in Rome, standing in the place of the ancient Tepidarium, lukewarm baths, and Caldarium, hot baths. A section of the former Termini serves as a gallery now. The collection of the nearby National Museum, the Museo Nazionale Romano, is on display here. The collection that contains only ancient artifacts presents not only the findings of excavations performed in Rome, but also objects delivered here from the farthest corners of the Roman Empire. Remember, late Greek and North African art is also part of the art of the empire. The Piazza della Esedra was renamed Piazza della Repubblica, but everybody calls it by its former name. The avenue starting from here is the location of an interesting striped church, made of blocks of varying color. But the fact about it that this is an architectural feature is that it's a proud Anglican temple right in the capital of the Catholic world. Going south, we pass the neoclassical building of the Opera House. The Santa Maria Maggiore is one of the most famous churches of the city, although it's outside the historically rich downtown area. There's a legend connected with it, just like with everything else in this magical city. According to the legend, Pope Liberius and Patrician John had the same dream one night. The Holy Mother instructed them to raise a temple to her honor at the location where they would find snow the following morning. The next morning they both found a patch of snow on Quirinal Hill, which even resembled the layout of a basilica. This doubtful story becomes even more incredible if you consider that all of this happened in August. But that's not why we love legends. Unto this day, on August the 5th every year, people spread white petals in the memory of the founders. Widely expanding stairs lead up to the serious, nicely spaced, indented facade created by Carlo Rinaldi in 1673. Going around the church, we arrive at the actual main square. The full beauty of the complex is best revealed from this aspect. The old Christian Basilica of Rome is now surrounded by Baroque, but about the middle of the block, the tallest medieval tower of Rome shoots towards the sky as an exclamation mark, recalling ancient times. Entering the church, layers upon layers of architectural activity of several centuries are revealed, but the imposing space is still saturated by the air and mood of old Christian basilicas. This church is a reservoir of art, and we can even forgive Domenico Fontana for interrupting the colonnade of the main nave to accommodate his beautiful Greek cross-shaped chapel. This nice chapel was the model for another chapel of a similar layout, built in a symmetrical fashion on the left side of the church upon the request of Pope Paul V. The cupolas of these chapels stand out from the mass of the building. The Baroque constructions were completed by Ferdinando Fuga in 1734, when he created the main facade of the temple. The perspective of 1,000 years opens up to us, wrote Friedrich Bogain. The early Christian mosaic on the apse is the work of a Franciscan friar, Jacopo Torriti. The Sistine Chapel is Fontana's masterpiece, while the Cappella Sforza was designed by Giacomo della Porta based on the drawings of Michelangelo. The closing chapter of the Via del Quirinale is a monumental Baroque square by the same name. Two significant Baroque places are located in this irregular-shaped square. One of them is the current presidential palace. This area was an elegant quarter already in ancient Rome, with castles, gardens, and villas offering a splendid view of the city. It was a favorite with wealthy people in the Renaissance era as well. Fontana, Maderna, Bernini, and Fuga were among the architects who built the grand, expansive palaces. There's a group of statues in the center of the square that is the epitome of Baroque glamour and grandiosity. Its obelisk once stood in the Martian field, but the statues were found among the ruins of Constantine's thermal baths. Michelangelo wanted to put them on the balustrades of the Capitol, but eventually they found their home in this antique water basin. The Quirinal is the highest one of the 7 hills of Rome. The air is better here than down in the valleys, so it was a popular building site early on. After the fall of ancient Rome, this neighborhood decayed as well, and it was only in the Renaissance era when a rebirth started from the ruins. The real boom came under Pope Sixtus V. The rebuilding of Rome was supposed to be the main achievement of the life of Felice Peretti, the son of a poor peasant family, but he could just begin the undertaking during the 5 years of his reign. But his extensive road constructions gave new impetus for the development of the Quirinal and Viminal hills as well. A plethora of splendid palaces sprang from the ground. That was also when the Palazzo Barberini and the Palazzo del Quirinale were built. The latter was originally intended as a papal summer residence, but when the monastery was abolished, it became the official residence of the presidents of Italy. Along the road up the hill, we can visit 2 beautiful Baroque churches. The architect of the San Carlo al Quattro Fontane was Francesco Baromini, while the San Andrea al Quirinale was designed by Bernini. The rivalry of the 2 artists made the city richer by many magnificent buildings. The famous Trevi Fountain is just 300 meters away from Quirinal Hill as the crow flies. Who would not remember the scene from Fellini's film La Dolce Vita, when Anita Ekberg took a dip in the Trevi Fountain? The grandiose structure is more than a simple fountain. Those who praise it say it's a Baroque water show, with the square in front of the pool serving as the auditorium. The backdrop for the 3-niche fountain is the Palazzo Poli. The center exedra features the god of the sea of Greek and Roman mythology. The water gushes through the rocks with elemental force. First, people subscribed to the belief that if you drink from the fountain, you will return to Rome. By the middle of the 19th century, this habit was replaced by a healthier one. Travelers stand by the fountain with their back to the pool and throw a coin into the water for the same reason. It's an eternal wish to return to the eternal city anyway. The column of Marcus Aurelius standing at the Colonna looks very much like Trajan's column that was the model for all such symbols of triumph. This one also has the ribbon-like spiral bas-relief wrapped around the column with images narrating the military campaign of the general in Pannonia. On the other side of the bustling square is the Rinascente Arcade, which in 2003 adopted the name of the great actor Alberto Sordi, who died that year. He's an unforgettable character of Italian comedy. He starred in movies like An American in Rome, Under the Sun of Rome, or The Belle of Rome. The architecture of the glass-roofed streets and squares among the neoclassic walls is also very spectacular. Visitors can enjoy a genuine Italian cappuccino in its elegant cafe. There's a remarkably high number of obelisks in the squares of Rome. Pope Sixtus V was the one who had them found, restored, and erected all over Rome. There's a plaque on the wall of the house where the excellent composer Pietro Mascagni lived. Not many people know that besides composing great operas, such as Rustic Chivalry, he also wrote 2 operettas. The construction of the fancy Baroque church of San Ambrogio e Carlo al Corso practically spanned the entire 17th century. Its cupola is the 3rd largest in Rome. For all its size, it almost disappears among the modern houses built rather oddly around it. No one would think that this round stone structure crumbling away in this enclosed grove is the mausoleum of Emperor Augustus. The structure, standing in the northern corner of the Martian field, was once covered in white marble, the hills planted with cedars, and had the statue of the emperor on it. The other church in the area is the San Lorenzo in Lucina that dates back to the 4th century. Walking the streets of Milan and Rome, it's obvious that Italy is a fashion superpower. The glass cube next to the mausoleum behind the temple is a supermodern fashion center. The lobby of the building on the riverbank features an indoor fountain and creates a synthesis of old and new by the reconstruction of Constantine's triumphal arch. Giordano Bruno, who was burned at the stake here, watches the foot traffic of the Campo de Fiori under the hood of his bronze statue. The square used to be a flower market, but not anymore. Now it's a typical, loud, colorful, and dirty Italian market, where the only thing they don't sell is maybe a collapsible submarine. But you can buy any kind of food here and find real treasures at the flea market. Then, at high noon, the vendors pack up and take a siesta, and the city workers clean up the square so it can start all over again the next day. The Largo Argentina is famous for 2 things. One of them is the Area Sacra, or Sacred Area, where a group of ancient sanctuaries was discovered and excavated in the 1920s. There are not many remains left from the Roman Republic era, and our knowledge of it is also fractional. That's why these findings are so precious. This is probably where Julius Caesar was stabbed to death after that famed Senate meeting. The other thing these ruins are known for is the cat shelter of Dr. Silvia Viviani. The stray cats of the city live among these ruins, cared for by her foundation. This may have its roots in the ancient Egyptian cat worship, and can be attributed to the superstitious nature of Italians, who believe if they hurt a cat, a member of their family will die. The Piazza della Rotonda is home to one of the most famous attractions of Rome, the Pantheon. It was built by Vipsanius Agrippa next to his lavish baths as a temple to worship all the gods. The name originates from a Greek sculpture named Pantheon, symbolizing all the gods. The original Pantheon had been destroyed by fire in 80 BC, and was completely reconstructed to its original size by Emperor Hadrian. The 43-meter diameter cupola was an impressive technical achievement at the time. Since the height of the building is equal to the dome's diameter, the interior space created by the unknown architect is close to a perfect sphere, considered to be the perfect shape in antiquity and probably ever since. The most distinctive feature of the dome is an unglazed oculus at the center, 9 meters in diameter. It allows the sunlight to enter freely, with the sun drawing circles of light on the marble floor as it moves. But if it rains, there's nothing to keep that out either. The ancient monument was later transformed into a Catholic church, and it paid for it dearly. Pope Urban VIII Barberini had the bronze sheets stripped from the inside of the roof to be used in part by Bernini for the canopy of the St. Peter's Basilica, and the rest for what else but making a cannon for the Castel Sant'Angelo. That gave rise to the famous bitter epigram: "What the barbarians did not do, Barberini did." The Pantheon was admired and studied by many. Gabor Sinte penned a nice story about a painter who finally had a chance to visit Rome, the city of his dreams. The first place he went to see was the Pantheon, and he did not see anything else in the city because he returned to this marvelous structure every day of the following 2 weeks. Michelangelo was also obsessed in studying the cupola, and when he was asked how he imagined the St. Peter's Basilica, he replied, "I will put the Pantheon on top of the Basilica of Maxentius." Besides emperors and popes, this temple is also the resting place of many artists. This is where King Victor Emanuel II and the king of painters Raffaello Santi were buried. According to his epigraph written by a Latin poet Bembo, "Here is one in whom nature feared, faint at such vying, eclipse while he lived, and decease at his dying." West of the Pantheon, on the other side of the Corso Rinascimento, lies the Piazza Navona. The square as we know it today was created mostly by Pope Inca X, who wanted to establish a worthy home to his family, the Pamphili dynasty. The facade of the palace, designed by Rinaldi, looked over the square, so, of course, it had to be changed. Bernini placed 3 fountains at the square. The figures of the Fontana dei Fiumi symbolize 4 great rivers of 4 continents: the Danube, the Nile, the Ganges, and the Rio de la Plata. The wide figures are plants and animals representing these parts of the world. In the middle of the fountain, there's another Egyptian obelisk, not exactly a rare architectural element in the Eternal City. When the square was created, Inca X wanted a family temple next to his palace. He commissioned the rival of Bernini, Borromini, with the work. The St. Agnes Church contains a very special architectural solution, having made a virtue out of necessity. The architect balanced the narrowness of the plot by a facade that arches backwards between the 2 bell towers, which is optically emphasized by the cupola as well. The side stairs promise a monumental interior that is actually relatively small. The earthly remains of the late Pope rest under the altar. The most beautiful square of the city features several churches. The national temple of the Germans is the Santa Maria della Anima, while the church of the French is named San Luigi dei Francesi. The shrine named after the Madonna of Peace was ordered by Pope Sixtus VI. It's almost as if we happened unexpectedly into this square that is somewhat isolated from its surroundings, but represents a wonderfully rich architectural world in itself. It inherited its shape and character from ancient Rome. Therefore, the long row of facades forming a concave arc in the north doesn't cleave a typically Baroque square into the sea of houses downtown. Still, it was the Baroque that gave life to this ancient square and filled it with its special atmosphere. The antique stadium was forged and shaped in the furnace of the city's millennial history, and donned a new coat in the Baroque era of Rome. So wrote Friedrich Pogain in his study on art history. The custom of flooding the amphitheaters with water had a rebirth in 1653, when at the order of Pope Inca X, the Piazza Navona was flooded on every weekend during the month of August. During the hot summer days, the townfolk, especially the children, enjoyed the huge pool, while at night the fancy coaches of the rich took circles around the fountains, refreshing in the cool air, as depicted by Panini's painting as well. This festival, called Festa del Lago, was kept regularly up until the 19th century. The figures of Fontana del Moro and the Fontana di Nettuno are favorably matching the figures of the largest fountain. You can hardly ever find a spot to sit down at the rim. The Piazza Navona is swarming with street painters at night, who are at home in every style from landscapes to portraits. The square is lined by bars, taverns, and ristorantes that fill up every night with merry and loud locals and foreign tourists. There are no signs in this merry whirl that would indicate Domitian's former circus, although its base walls can still be seen in the St. Agnes Church. The saint whose name the temple bears was executed in the arena of that circus. The gorgeous long hair of the Virgin, who was stripped bare, covered her whole body. A miracle protected her chastity, but could not save her life. East of the Piazza Navona, in line with the Capitolium, is the Isola Taverina. The Tiber has only one island in the area of Rome. Epidemics decimated the population in 263 BC. The Senate sent a delegation to the sanctuary of Asclepion in Greece, and they returned home with a snake, one of the sacred animals of the god. The snake suddenly jumped into the water from the ark that was towed on the river and swam to the island. That is where Asclepion's healing sanctuary was built. In honor of that ark, the island was shaped into the form of a ship. This is a place of healing unto this day, as it has been the hospital of the Order of Mercy since it was built, and of course rebuilt many times in 1589. There are several churches and a few good restaurants on the island. The broken bridge, the Ponte Rotto, can still be seen in the river. Its original name was Aemilius Bridge, and that was the first stone bridge in Rome. Across the island lays the southern part of the Martian field. Pope Julius II had an avenue designed parallel to the river. He had the buildings blocking the way torn down and commissioned Raphael, Bramante, and Sangallo to design new buildings. A part of the remaining antique buildings were integrated into the new ones. North of the Capitol, in the geometric center of the city, stands the enormous Victor Emanuel monument. Those who despise it say that the terrace on top of the Il Vittoriano offers a great view because the monument itself doesn't block the panorama. If you look to the north, the entire downtown lies in front of you, with the Piazza Venezia, the busiest square in town, at your feet. Turning south, the Capitol, the Forum Romanum, and a little further away, the Coliseum come into view. The place where the Baroque cupolas rise above the bustle of activity today is the same place where the brisk life of Rome was bustling 2,000 years ago. Across the street, the avenue of the Via del Corso splits through the sea of houses. It stretches along the track of the main road of the ancient city, the Via Lata, that ran along here. If you look to the west, you can see all the way to the Vatican, while in the east, the ruins of the Fora of Augustus and Trajan appear. Victor Emmanuel II was the king who united Italy. His colossal monument made of white Carrara marble is the real center of the city. All roads lead to Rome, and all roads in Rome lead to the Victor Emmanuel monument. The structure turned out overly monumental, so it clashes with its surroundings. The locals like to call it a wedding cake. Saccioni raised his structure as a tribute to the unification of Italy, to glorify the most sacred values of the nation and military heroism. The construction started in 1885 and was completed in 1925. The two fountains on both sides of the large flight of stairs represent the Tyrrhenian and the Adriatic Seas. The stairs in the middle lead up to the altar of the nation and to the tomb of the unknown soldier, where an unidentified soldier who died in World War I was buried. It's continuously guarded by sentries of honor. The statues in the niche of the apse were made by Angelo Zanelli. The equestrian statue of the king in the middle is the work of Chiaradia. On the sides of the plinth, the allegorical statues of Italian cities were sculpted by Maccianini. On top of the arcade, there is a series of statues representing the Italian provinces, with two bronze quadrigae on top of the portico on both sides. The gigantic building houses a military museum, a research institute on the era of the War of Independence, and an archive. The revolutionary year of 1848 bore its fruit in Italy as well. Of course, the unification, the Risorgimento, wasn't achieved by the king alone. Prime Minister Cavour played an important part in it, and so did Italy's national hero, Garibaldi, who has a statue in almost every city and is still held in great reverence to this day. The people expected Pope Pius IX to lead the forces demanding unification. When he failed to do so, the people turned against him. The Pope fled Rome, and the followers of Garibaldi proclaimed a republic. Napoleon III rushed in to help the Pope, and after heavy fights, conquered Rome. The head of the Church returned to the Vatican and watched the process of Italy being united from there. The still remaining autonomous kingdoms were annexed, and the Austrian troops were driven out of Venice. Following the 1861 unification, it took another 9 years for Rome to join the Union after the withdrawal of French troops. Originally situated between two libraries in the Forum of Trajan, stood the triumphal column of the emperor. Actually, it still stands there, but its glorious surroundings fell into ruin over time. The column is over 30 meters in height, with an 8-meter-long pedestal, providing ample room for the intricate carvings winding around the shaft in an escalating spiral to chronicle Trajan's triumphs. The relief portrays the military campaigns against the Dacians in the territory of present-day Transylvania in 23 scenes engraved in marble from the island of Paros. The frieze is 270 meters long, showing 2,500 figures, and is a true representation of the battles, the sieges, the taking of prisoners, the marches, and the episodes of life in the military camps. The ashes of the emperor were laid to rest in the pedestal, but the urn was stolen over the centuries. The column was topped by a statue of the emperor, but Sixtus V replaced it with a statue of St. Peter in the Middle Ages. Trajan's Forum was considered the most beautiful square in ancient Rome. The emperor commissioned Apollodorus of Damascus with the construction. In his time, the architect was just as renowned a master as Michelangelo or Leonardo in the Renaissance era. The 116-meter-long and 95-meter-wide square was covered with large marble tiles, surrounded by porticos on 3 sides, housing the statues of the greatest figures of Roman history. The middle of the square was naturally dominated by a bronze statue of the emperor. The backdrop to the Forum was a 5-story department store that could be a worthy predecessor of any present-day mall. The 150 shops were crowded with customers and merchants. They offered oil, wine, rare spices, and the products of the mysterious East, but there were a corn and a fish market here too. This is just another proof that everyday life in the Roman Empire might really not have been all that different from ours today. Trajan's Forum was directly linked with the Forum of Caesar on one side and the Forum of Augustus on the other, separated from the ruins of which by the wide avenue today. The legend of Romulus and Remus, the twins raised by wolves, is the product of the excellent imagination of Titus Livius, a writer of the Augustus era. Their statues can be found in many Italian cities, including the Capitolian Hill here in Rome. The capital, or in Italian, Campidoglio, was the most highly respected hill of Rome. It was the center of religious life in antiquity. The remains of ancient times are not really visible anymore. Near the decorative steps is the Tarpei Rock, from which those who committed treason were pushed off. The old temples and the Capitol's altar are gone. The pleasing look of the square can be attributed to Michelangelo, who designed it upon the request of Pope Paul III. In his plan, there were 3 palaces on 3 sides of the square: the Palazzo dei Conservatori, the Palazzo Nuovo, and the Palazzo Senatorio. There are lions sitting at the feet of the impressive stairway leading to the square, with the equestrian statues of Castor and Pollux, and the statues of the 2 Constantines in the long balustrades. The white pattern in the dark grey pavement directs your eye to the equestrian statue of Marcus Aurelius in the center of the square. The sculpture itself is genuine antiquity, originally gilded, which came off over the course of centuries. Michelangelo contributed only the pedestal and the pavement to the square. In ancient times, the capital opened up towards the Forum Romanum to welcome those visiting from there. Now it looks to the northwest, as if reaching out towards the new Rome, wrote Friedrich Bogain. Before we take a closer look at the vast reservoir of antique monuments known by the world as Forum Romanum, it's worth taking a view of it from an elevated position, at least from the upper deck of a sightseeing tour bus. There are many illustrated maps available at bookstores and tourist information offices to help you navigate around town. Gismondi and De Carlo's model of ancient Rome is on display at the Museo della Civiltà Romana. It's a very nice way to recognize the buildings that are still standing. Eternal spirit, eternal force, you Rome. After so much spilled blood and forgetting, clanking noise, pale silence and so many failures, flames spread by countless changing winds, still happily stepping over your own ruins and ashes, you'll grow into a giant, thus celebrating your greatest triumph, defeating death. Still aglow with youth always and forever, fabulous sister of Palace's city, guarded by swords and the flash of protecting weapons, flooding the world with the light of your torch, giving a sparkle for all peoples to chase away their dark. O you, shadow-chasing Rome, your light keeps on shining, forever triumphing over decaying time. So wrote Giovanni Pascoli in his poem, Hymn to Eternal Rome. The various parts of the Forum are connected by the Via Sacra, the sacred road, the original cobbles of which are still visible. In the 21st century, the Forum Romanum is only a field of ruins where we try to evoke its past greatness with the help of reconstruction drawings and explanations by archaeologists and museologists. Yes, that was the largest and most impressive public square in Rome, surrounded by basilicas, temples, and monuments, and was the scene of public life in the city. A few hundred years BC, there was an unhealthy and almost unnavigable marsh at this location. Thus, the history of Rome did not begin here, but up on the hills where farming and stock-breeding Latins and Sabines were struggling to survive. The bushy plains that lay at the feet of the Palatine, the Capitoline, the Esquiline, and Quirinal Hills, drenched by many streams, separated the people living in the hills instead of connecting them. Then King Tarquinius Priscus had the marsh drained and ordered the construction of the great sewer canal, the Cloaca Maxima, that ran to the Tiber. It was covered only much later, and its original vaults are still visible. It took a long time for this area to become a suitable place for the residents of the hills to meet, trade their goods, and talk about things concerning all of them. That is the time when Rome was born. For quite a while, the Forum was the only public square and market, and only much later were similar squares established as the city developed. The Forum Caesaris spread out in the center of the ruins visible today, at the spot where Phoca's column is now standing. The three columns covered by stone blocks to the right are remains of the Temple of Castor and Pollux. There are many legends about the Palatine Hill that was so famous in antiquity. This was the marsh where Romulus and Remus once found shelter. This was where the enigmatic Etruscans, who knew how to live and die, came to conquer. But as they disseminated their knowledge they fell, and thus the city was born. Its ancient walls are still here and there on the horizon. Emperor after emperor, palace after palace, I can hardly follow, roaming marble floors, arches and columns all along the Palatine. As this excerpt of István Vas's poem, Forum Romanum, describes it, the Basilica of Maxentius was used for the purposes of public administration and justice, just like the other ancient basilicas. These buildings were given a religious function only after the spread of Christianity. Francesca Ponziani was a charitable Roman woman who was canonized in 1608. Since she was buried here, the temple that was built on the model of the old Venus and Rome shrine took her name. Francesca is the protective saint of drivers, so on her feast day, on March 9th, long queues of cars line up so their drivers can receive the blessing of the church. The triumphal arch of Titus rises above the Via Sacra. The elegantly simple white marble arch is a worthy closure to the Forum Romanum. It was erected by Domitian, the brother and successor of Titus, in memory of the Jerusalem military campaign, when his brother dragged thousands of Jewish prisoners of war to Rome as slaves to work on building the Colosseum. The raising of triumphal arches originates from the ancient superstition, according to which if you pass between two rocks through a covered strait, you lose your faults and bad qualities. The Romans were probably only following the tradition without being aware of the real meaning behind it. East of the Basilica of Maxentius and behind the St. Francesca Temple, the remaining columns of the Venus Temple spear up. The Temple of Venus in Roma was allegedly designed by Emperor Hadrian himself, but he just couldn't tolerate the criticism, so the task fell into the hands of the excellent, but apparently not cautious enough, Damascene architect Apollodorus. The missing pillars were replaced by plastic columns that are illuminated at night. The construction of the Triumphal Arch of Constantine began in 312, when Rome's glory already had started to fade, but her glorious past still captured the imagination of many. The Senate and the people intended to pay tribute with the three-bay Triumphal Arch to the victory of Constantine I at Pont Milvius. The structure was completed in only 3 years, so that the inscription congratulating the emperor on the 10th anniversary of his reign could be added to it. For reasons unknown, while several of the triumphal arches in the Forum Romanum fell almost completely to ruin, this one has survived many centuries in excellent condition. Not long ago, traffic was still allowed around the Coliseum and the Triumphal Arch, as you may remember from many movies. This is where Gregory Peck and Audrey Hepburn were riding around on his little Vespa in the unforgettable Roman holiday. But traffic is now banned from the area because the exhaust fumes are harmful to the limestone and marble structures. The Colosseum is great for us because it's a living memory of the very Romans we learnt so much about when we were kids. The spirit senses a connection between their undertakings and the size of the structures they built. Is there any other place on earth that saw such large mass and such grandiosity at the same time? The king of the world, the emperor of Rome, was greeted by the cheer of 100,000 spectators here, but now the place is so silent. So wrote Stendhal, who visited this place in an age when there was silence in this gigantic stadium. Today, that doesn't happen too often, since every day tens of thousands of visitors stand in line from morning till night, waiting to get in. They had chariot and horse races in the circuses, theatrical plays in the theatrums, while the amphitheaters were venues of gladiator fights. It was a Roman custom to name the structures after people who had built them, so this one was named Amphitheatrum Flavium. The people of Rome named it Colosseum, after the 30-meter-tall statue of Nero called Colossus standing next to it. The perimeter of the elliptical Colosseum is 527 meters. The diameter of the long axis is 188 meters, with a seating capacity of 80,000. The largest box in the bottom was the emperor's, with the boxes of the Vestal Virgins, the senators, and the chivalric orders next to it. The 80 entry-level arches were numbered, so the owners of the entrance tickets knew in which sector their seats were located. The poorest people, the plebeians, sat in the upper gallery. The groundwork of the amphitheater goes down 9 meters below ground level. This was where the technical equipment, the underground pulley systems, and plumbing were placed, in addition to the cages of the wild animals and the not much more comfortable cells of the slaves. Many movies were made on the subject of gladiator fights. One of the most famous is the Academy Award-winning Gladiator starring Russell Crowe. In the 60s, this was also a popular theme of movies made in Cinecittà, the movie capital of Italy. Among the spectacles in the Colosseum, the gladiator fights were the most noble, when fully armed fighters fought life-and-death battles one-on-one, providing prime examples of death-defying courage, according to Cicero. But if the bill listed dies venations, Then the audience would see the fight and death of wild animals brought in from Africa and the four corners of the gigantic empire: elephants against rhinos, bears against buffaloes, lions against pit bulls. The hunt would not be real without a proper jungle setting created in the arena, and convicts, often Christian prisoners, fought with bare hands, trying to escape the animals in true mortal fear until their opponents struck them down, wrote Janos Shediansky in his travel book called Memory and Magic. We left the Coliseum at twilight because it was getting dark. If you look at it, it makes everything else seem small. It's so huge that even our soul cannot retain its image in full. Our memory stores a smaller version of it, and it will look larger again when we return, says an entry in Goethe's diary on November 11th, 1786. Probably everybody saw one of the most famous scenes in film history, the chariot race in Ben-Hur. It makes it easier to imagine what the Circus Maximus looked like in its prime, because there's not much left of it by now. The shape of the Murcia Valley was as if the gods had specifically created it for chariot races. That is still visible today, however. The structures that made it the greatest racetrack of its time have vanished by now. 250,000 spectators cheered on the drivers once. The wall, called a spina, or spine, in the middle of the track, stretched to 344 meters with a more than 80-meter wide road on both sides. The obelisk that is now the main feature of the square in front of the Lateran Palace used to stand in the center of the ridge. The track was surrounded by grandstands. The Emperor's Box was on the Palatine Hill. The remains of the Domus Flavia, the palace of the Domitians, was still a noteworthy sight with their golden yellow walls. The enormous reception hall and the marble-floored internal courts with the fountains are still recognizable. The terraces on top of the baths of Septimus Severus offer a great view of the entire Circus Maximus. One of the countless attractions of Rome is the Mouth of Justice, or Bocca della Verità. It's a huge round block of stone with a relief depicting a human face. Legend says that if a liar puts their hand into its mouth, the statue will bite it off. Originally, it stood in a bath, spouting steam through its nose and mouth. Now, it's lying in wait for victims in the lobby of the Santa Maria Cosmedin Temple, who queue up in long lines for the test. A hand put in the mouth of justice is one of the hottest photo themes in Rome. In the Piazza, as a recurring city feature, there's a fountain of the Tritons. Behind it stands a round temple with an exterior that is reminiscent of the Vesta Temple at the Forum Romanum. 20 statues of Carrara marble are supporting its roof. Today, it cannot be determined with certainty which god was honored by it. Today it bears the name Santa Maria del Sole, after the sunshiny image of the Madonna it is home to. In the center of the Via del Circus Massimo, on a white marble pedestal, stands the bronze sculpture depicting Ugo la Malta. Behind it, in the maze of the little alleys of the Aventine Hill, is the cozy square of the Knights of Malta. The little square, the Piazza Cavalieri de Malta, is public, but the park hiding behind the high walls with the palace and the cemetery lying beside it are strictly off limits. It's not even a part of Rome, but enjoys an extraterritorial status. The most notable feature of the square is a bronze keyhole on the huge gate. Peeking through it, you can see the dome of the St. Peter's Basilica, framed by a line of trees, probably not by accident. The chivalric order that originally operated on the island of Rhodes, and then on Malta, has always maintained good relations with the Vatican. Their headquarters in Rome was designed by Giambattista Piranesi, who was not thrifty with the blazons and symbols carved in stone. The old city walls south of the Aventine designate the borders of the present-day city as well. A section of the ancient city walls is still visible on the Piazza Ostiense, along with the city gate, Porta Ostiense. It's just like the gate of a medieval castle, and the road towards Ostia ran between its bastions. Across the square is the railway section from where you can get there by train too. the Pyramid of Cestius, was raised in memory of tribune Gaius Cestius Epulo in 12 BC. The 27-meter-high Egyptian-style tomb has remained remarkably intact for posterity to see, despite the fact that it's the oldest structure in Rome. A liberated slave had it built to honor his master, who made him his heir. The inscription commemorates that in Latin. Not far from the pyramid stands the San Paolo Fuori la Mura Basilica and Monastery. This is the second largest church in Rome, after the St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican. In 1823, it was almost completely destroyed by a great fire, and the reconstruction took 6 years. Its facade is decorated by mosaics. In the richly ornamented monumental interior, it's really worth taking a look at the artifacts that survived the fire. The monstrance of Arnolfo di Cambio, the candle holder of Vasiletto, and the mosaic of the apse depicting Christ and the disciples. Going east along the city walls, you can reach the gate named after Saint Sebastian. The construction of the Via Appia Antica, the Queen of Roads, began in 312 BC. It led from Rome to the south through the Porta San Sebastiano. First it ran only to Capua, 195 kilometers away, then later farther to the harbor city of Brindisi on the coast. The cobbled road lined by pine trees is in better condition than many that were asphalted only a few years ago. The Via Appia Antica is not to be confused with the Via Appia Nuova that is 5 kilometers away. The Via Appia retained its special milieu. It's a worthwhile experience to stroll on it and take in the atmosphere of the ancient dilapidated monuments. Rome is not only a picturesque city, but a poetic one as well. This is how Mario Socrate, a 20th century poet, described the summer in Rome. When along the gentle Tiber the tired acacias are nodding, upon the first warm breath of the wind, and far away from the path of the sun, among the poplars swaying pine trees reach towards the light, and when beyond distant bridges grey houses appear in clusters, and you, my friend, can feel that they came to cool down in the late current that shows their flip-sided reflection in the water. This is the summer in Rome, like that lead that weighs down the longest day, but makes the night so light.